How do you keep track of your D&D games? Greetings and welcome back to another adventurous, exciting episode of the Vodkast Does Dungeons and Dragons. I'm your host as always, DMJ, and today I want to talk about setting up a D&D game. We've made a lot of these videos, a lot of them have been a lot more intricate, going into details about the feats or rules, and a lot of times I've sat down with my friends and we've talked them over as well. But today I want to talk about how I set up my D&D game, the same game that I've been running for 30 years. To some, starting a D&D game is very daunting, it's overwhelming, especially if it's your first time setting up a game. So I try to simplify it now, just as simple as I did back then. And what I like to do is I like to start with a story. I write an actual story. There's a story written usually from beginning to end. Sometimes it's just part of the first adventure that the characters are going to be on. Then I choose locations. Where are they going to be? Who are they going to run into? If they're traveling, how long is it going to take to travel there? Do I need maps for all of these? It can get really overwhelming, but over time, it starts to smooth itself out. And I want to tell you what I've been doing on my last leg of this campaign, the end of my 30-year campaign. If you haven't checked out this video, I briefly discussed it, where I'm finally bringing, after 30 years, this long story to a final close. And in doing so, I wanted to make sure that everything was ironed out so that when I sat down with my players, there was no lag, there was no wait, I gotta find this, I gotta find this. So what I did was, as I do always, is I write the story. So the story from here to the end of the game is going to take about another year. I've determined that by probably July or August of next year, it should be wrapping up. So a little bit less than a year. What I did is I chaptered everything. So right now the party is in a basement. They just had a huge epic fight with some, oh God, what was it? I can't even remember. Oh, there was a few drow that they had run into and some creature that they were dragging along with them. So what I did is I call this chapter 1. Starting now until the end of the game, I have 30 chapters set out for my game. And I know that each chapter is going to encompass a certain amount of things. Sometimes that ends with the characters leveling up. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes it might end with the party leveling up more than once. For example, there is a keep that they'll be traveling to that is heavily guarded by vampire and drow. It's a long story. I'll tell you all about it sometime. However, I knew that this map was going to be very intricate, and it has 51 different locations in the map, upper levels, sub-levels, towers, and everything in between. So I had to come up with that, and my number one tool to go to for that is Dungeon Alchemist. If you're a DM and you've never used Dungeon Alchemist, wait for it to go on sale maybe. I mean, it's worth the money alone just to pay for it outright. And you can design your own maps, and it's all AI generated. So if you throw down a tavern, it's going to fill in that tavern. You don't like that tavern, you hit a little button, it'll refresh the tavern, reshape it, resize it. They're going to be adding levels, which is fantastic, very soon. So what I do is I take a look at these chapters. I take a look at chapter 1. Now let's just say, for the sake of argument, that chapter 1 is this keep. So I set up a Word document and I basically described each room by number, correlating with the numbers that I put on a throwaway map that I could use just to refer to. And each room has a description, and underneath it, what I do is I take the links from D&D Beyond, whether it be a magic item that they're going to find, a monster they're going to fight, or some other reference that I need to, and I put it inside of each of the chapters. So each room, in this case, has a link to everything I need. So when they enter that room, if they're going to go into a fight, if there's going to be a battle, I can click on those links and it'll bring it up for me right away on D&D Beyond, and then I can just roll all their attacks from there, and it goes into my VDT roll 20, which is my preference at the time. And if you didn't know about a little thing called Beyond 20, it's a little plugin for your web browser that allows you to connect the two, so that roll 20 and D&D Beyond, you click on D&D Beyond, the results show up on roll 20. That's super important to know if you didn't know about that. Each room has a description, has all the items linked to it that I'm going to need. Then I just go through the whole thing. Now, at the same time, I'm keeping in mind the story elements that I have planned out for a very long time now. So what I do is I take those story elements that I know there's going to be a big bad guy. I know there's going to be an item that they're looking for. And I decide where in that location those things are going to be and when they're going to encounter them. And as a DM, sometimes on the fly, when your party's making weird choices or you expect them to go straight and they go left, you have to veer them back on course. And it's easy enough to do, especially in a situation where they can't leave where they are for the time being. To me, the story element has always been the most important to me as a DM and to my players, because it's really what drives them. It makes them want to be adventurers in this world. It makes them want to come back to the table and know what's around the next corner, what's going to happen next, when are we going to find this guy, when are we going to find the item that we're looking for. And so the story element to me is really critical. And right up front, I usually try to timeline the events that are going to occur over the course of, let's say, the next 3 or 4 games, just so I'm prepared. Even though, like I said earlier, your party may decide we're going to go right instead of left. You can get them back there when you need to. Ultimately, the mapping process comes down to whatever tool you want to use to map, whether you're hand doing it, which I absolutely love doing. I have a ton of notebooks over there on my bookcase with old maps that I've created from older games. However, I love the fact that nowadays we have the technology, not just VTTs, but tools like Dungeon Alchemist and Dungeon Draft and all these other software that allows you to do this map. So mapping for me comes down to 2 things. If they're going to go into a town, if there are major places in this town they're going to visit, then I will create a map for it. If it's going to be a brief encounter, sometimes I won't even do it at all. If they're going to be spending time in that town, I will actually take the time to map out the entire town in Dungeon Alchemist, lay out all the plot elements. And I have to say that using things like Dungeon Alchemist is very influential as a DM. It's very inspiring to me when I lay down something and something looks a little weird or something different, or maybe as I'm putting down this, maid shop, I know that the owner lives in this place and not a lot of people in town like him. And so all these little elements come into play, and those names are great to keep track of too. Make sure if you have a town, start another separate Word document. You know that in this town they've met these people or will meet these people. That way in the future, if you ever find yourself back in this town, they can relate to the people that they're going to see. It's not like going to a brand new village, town, city, whatever it might be. And like I said, maps is kind of a twofold process. Sometimes there's large-scale maps where they can move around from building to building, and other times it's just going to be a room that they're going to be sitting in or doing battle in or whatever situation they find themselves in. I want a nice, detailed, intricate map of that so that they can interact with the doors, the windows, the lights. They know, what they can see and can't see. And as far as I'm concerned, anything that shows up on a map that I create in Dungeon Alchemist, whether I see it or not, exists in that room. And if the players say, hey, there's a butter knife there, can I use that to butter my toast? Well, then they can do that. It's just kind of boring, but you know what I mean. So story, location and maps, and using those links are 3 major tools that I find to be priceless as a DM. Having all access to that, especially when I'm running the game and before I'm running the game, allows me to prep better and allows me to sit down at the table and not figure out what I'm trying to do then and there. I think that's a very important thing, and it's a good tip to know as a new DM or an old DM, that you don't want to be referring to things left and right. Hang on a second. What does this guy say? What does this girl say? Where did I put that? All that stuff should be in your head or at least right in front of you, and you should know where it is at all times. That way your game isn't being held up and your players aren't getting bored and they start talking about this, that, and the other. I think that this technique of having it all in a Word document or whatever document software that you use is a great way to keep track of it. And like I said, there are a bunch of tools out there that you can use for map making. So if you're using if you're playing virtual D&D, then I highly recommend investing some money into some software that you can use to do your mapping with. Another thing is a lot of those tools and a lot of the marketplace items on Roll20 when they go on sale, I try to pick them up, especially monsters. The more monsters I have access to, the better it is for not being able to repeat things in the game. And that's another tough thing, especially in a world where it's overrun by maybe it's dark elves, maybe it's demons, maybe it's vampires, whatever is happening in your world at the time, whatever location is being overrun by this, it's hard to kind of change it up. So a lot of times what I've been doing is going into the monster section on D&D Beyond, and I'll choose what location they're in. Maybe it's Arctic, maybe it's a desert, and I can narrow it down that way. They have some great filters on there, and sometimes you find a creature that just happens to work with what you're dealing with at the time. Perhaps the drow came up from the Underdark, and they brought with them creatures that would have been, in the Underdark. They brought them in cages to help defend whatever their base is going to be, their keep, their castle, their encampment, whatever it's going to be. And just like these map-making software, sometimes just reading descriptions of creatures, magical items, spells, feats, they just give you this idea, this little spark of an idea that can go places you never thought it was going to be. So those are most of my tips for starting a new game. Is you really want to chronicle and keep track of everything that is going on previously, present, and things that are going to happen in the future, keep them in a well-organized document. Don't keep them in random notebooks. I wouldn't recommend, because they end up somewhere. I got a note over here, a note over there, and then I end up forgetting half of the stuff I wanted to do. So having that, and also using Word or whatever document software you're using to link things so that you can, go to them quickly. That's a step further that I'm not going to talk about here, because I myself very rarely integrate that unless it's a chapter setting where you want to get to a certain chapter right away or go back to a certain chapter right away to get a name or so on and so forth. So I hope this helps you guys out. I didn't really have much planned for today. I have been sick for the last week and a half, so I didn't even know if I was going to get one of these episodes done before Wednesday. So if you guys are loving the content I'm creating as much as I love creating the content that you guys are watching, would you please consider subscribing to the channel? It would be a huge help, Rooney, for me. Don't forget to make somebody smile today and make yourself a better person tomorrow than you were today tomorrow. Let's make the world spin a little bit happier and a little bit nerdier together. Let's sing and dance in the sun and the rain as one, my brothers and sisters. Live life to the fullest and love every moment of it, because you just never know when that last moment's going to come for you. However, never live in fear of that moment. Always live in love. But never let your inner child die. Ooh-wee. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another, and take care of those around you who cannot take care of themselves, for they are the ones that need it the most. And if no one has told you today that they love you, the Vodkast loves you very much, just the way you are. All right, guys, do no harm. I'm Geycen Oliveira. This is the Vodkast, and I'll catch you guys a little bit further on down the road to 50. Take care, my friends, and happy adventuring.
Don't go to sleep with a catch it in your pocket.